What if the Pahlavi dynasty never fell? The Pahlavi dynasty ruling over the imperial state of Persia, later imperial state of Iran, was the last of many dynasties ruling over Persia/Iran. They came to power when in 1921 Reza Khan overthrew the government and became an emperor 4 years later after forcing Ahmed Shah Qajar to abdicate, and ended when in 1979 the Iranian Revolution forced Mohammad Reza Pahlavi to abdicate, leading to the takeover of the Ayatollah regime. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Pahlavi dynasty never fell? I split this timeline in two timelines. In the first one, the revolution of 1979 fails or doesn't take place, and in the second one, the 1953 coup d'état doesn't take place. In this timeline, the 1979 revolution doesn't take place or fails, and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi stays in power, but dies the next year, and Reza Pahlavi II would become Shah. It is possible that he would agree to be a constitutional monarch, especially since he is with 22 years a young Shah, and because of the recent revolution. With the death of Ruhollah Khomeini in 1989, the opposition to the Shah would fade away as they have to figure to rally again. In this timeline, the Iraq-Iran war most likely doesn't happen, and Iraq isn't in debt, which would lead to the Gulf War. Just like with Pakistan, the US would support the Mujahideen in Afghanistan through Iran, but unlike Pakistan, Iran doesn't support the Islamist Taliban, but the royalist Mahaz-e-Milli, who could be the one to unite Afghanistan. They would then restore the House of Barakzai under Mohammad Zahir Shah, who would rule until 2007 when his son Ahmad becomes Shah. Without the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia isn't at risk, and the US wouldn't deploy forces in this desert state, and with that there is a small change that 9 May 11th not happen. If it does happen, Al-Qaeda wouldn't be stationed in Afghanistan. They either could remain in Sudan in this timeline or go to an alternative Islamist state like Comoros or Mauritania. In this timeline, Iran is a far more liberal and less authoritarian nation, and without sanctions from the US, who are in this timeline a close ally of the Pahlavi dynasty, would have a far greater economy and smaller inflation. It is even possible for them to build their own nukes like Israel did, as the US wouldn't oppose that. In the second timeline, the 1953 coup doesn't take place. It took place because the then Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized Iran's oil fields held by UK, which led them to ask the US to coup the entire nation of Iran. In this timeline, the US under Eisenhower doesn't agree to do that, or doesn't believe that he is a communist, and without the US, UK couldn't retake its oil fields. In this timeline, Iran isn't closely allied to the US, but is rather part of the non-aligned world. Iran would also be a democracy, and a revolution like in 1979 is basically impossible to think of. Just like in the last timeline, the Iraq-Iran war doesn't take place, meaning that the Gulf War also doesn't happen. Iran still supports the Mujahideen, but in this version the Democratic Jamiat-e-Islami. But since they aren't allied to the US, most support goes through Pakistan, meaning the Taliban probably still take over. 9/11 could still happen, but the US wouldn't invade Iraq, meaning the war ends in 2011 when the US left Iraq. In our own timeline, as they only stayed in Afghanistan to stabilize the country after Iraq collapsed. And since they leave shortly after Osama bin Laden got killed, the war would be remembered as a victory. In this timeline, Iran is a shining democracy in the chaotic Middle East, but wouldn't be allied to any great power. In either timeline, Iran is in any measurement doing far better than in our own timeline, and Iraq is also more stable, but still under Saddam Hussein. Iran is a greater regional power in the Middle East than in our own timeline. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.